spring. Hello everyone, it's Tanya coming to you from Brooklyn, New York. It's Sunday, March 23rd, rather late in the day, so I'm concerned that the lighting is going to be a little bit dark, but we'll give it a go. Hope everyone's doing well, and I just wanted to thank everyone for subscribing and for your comments and for your words of encouragement. And it's just so nice to hear from you and where to get started. So I thought I would start with a little video that I did of the Queen sampler from Amy Mitten. So in my last video, I showed you that I had completed the sampler, and Senorita Stitches suggested that I do a close-up video of some of the specialty stitches. So I went ahead and did that, and I'm going to insert it here. Hello, I'm going to give you a quick little tour, close-up tour of Secrets of the Queen sampler, and a tour and a close-up, I guess, of some of the specialty stitches. So let's start in this corner here. It's a little hard to see, but the borders around the edge, the main border around the entire sampler, as well as the two inner borders, was stitched in Montenegrin. And lucky for me, I have Amy Mitten's book on how to stitch the Montenegrin stitch, and it was extremely useful because it allowed me to know how to make corners. So when I was stitching down the sampler, there were instructions on how to make the turn and start stitching from right to left. And then same over here, when it was time for me to go from the lower corner and back up to the top of the sampler, there were specific instructions in the book about how to do that. So extremely helpful when I stitched this piece. And I have to say, the Montenegrin stitch was a really fun stitch to do. Not hard to pick up. Excuse me, in this corner of the sampler, you can see some satin stitching here on these small, I guess they're small little pebbles. And there are some ciphers stitched within that satin stitching. Going up here to the pear tree, all of this was stitched in 10 stitch, along with the clouds and the arm and the hand and the pruning shear. All of that is tent. The steam in this area rising up from the pond was seed stitch, as well as within the raindrops. And then around the pond here, this is all queen stitches. Moving to the mermaid, detached buttonhole stitch for her, I guess to be the scalloped buttonhole scallop, I guess. And then on her belt here is a cable chain stitch with a metallic thread. Moving over here, the same corner or opposite corner of the first corner I showed you, again some more satin stitches. Moving up here to the plume of feathers, back stitch. And we'll make our way across the top here, cross stitch in the fleur-de-lis, more queen stitches in the thistle, And you can see more ciphers here across the top that from a distance may not be so visible. So once you get up close, they become a little bit more visible. And the little cat and the mouse, I think, is so sweet. And then moving down this side, most of it along here was either cross stitch or tent stitch. And you see a few more ciphers here in the jacket. There's an L and two F's, and I'm not sure what those ciphers are, but from a distance you wouldn't necessarily know that those are there, and you might think it was just part of the design. This entire section here was all tent stitch, except for in the cornucopia there's some satin stitches. So there you have it, a full tour, a little bit closer up look at this very fun sampler. And there's the overall view again. The next thing I thought I would talk to you about is another finish. Can you believe it? I know I've finished. This will be number 3 that I think I've finished this year. So in my, I can't remember, maybe my first video, I showed the book cover sampler from Essamplaire, and I don't know how far along I was on it at that point. I can't recall. But anyway, after I finished, I think it was after I finished the Queen sampler, Secrets of the Queen, I went back to the book cover and started working on that again and actually finished it. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. So here it is. And wow, I really love doing this one too. I love all of these samplers I've been working on this year. So I guess that's a good thing, to love what you do and the projects that you choose. So believe it or not, I counted, this is full of queen stitches, and I counted the number of queen stitches, and it was just over 1,000 queen stitches. I think I'm going to say this is finished, even though in the instructions it does tell you to do a gobelin, I think it's gobelin stitch for the background in this cream. I think it was the white, yeah, in that white stitch that's at the top of that little flower right there. Now the gobelin stitch is a really pretty stitch, but I just, I kind of like how it is without a background. So I'm not going to do the background. The other thing I'm not going to do is also in the instructions, it said I should take 6 strands of the floss and couch the floss around some of the motifs. So around like a leaf here, for example, and also those leaves, this big leaf here, as well as take the thread and couch sort of the veins within the leaves. And I did it. I kind of did a mock-up of how that would look, and I didn't like it. So I'm not going to do that either. So I'm going to call it a finish and probably frame it. It's not very big. It's actually kind of 8 by 8 inches, I think. So it's a small piece, hours and hours of stitching, because all those queen stitches took a long time. But it was a really fun stitch, and I'm happy that it's finished. Happy and sad, actually. I don't know. Sometimes I feel sad when I finish something, and then I'm kind of at a loss of what to do, and I mean, goodness knows I've got a lot to do and a lot of things started, so it's not like for lack of anything to do. But it takes me a while to kind of gear up and move on to the next project. So after I finished the book cover, I thought, I kind of feel like starting something new. And I thought I would start stitching. Which one did I want to start on? I think I wanted to start on one of GigiR's samplers, and it was the red deer. That's what it was. I wanted to start the red deer. So I went to my stash, pulled out the chart. I purchased the fabric and the threads quite some time ago, and sort of set myself down to get started. And as I was measuring where to begin, I usually start in the upper left-hand corner. So I was measuring out where to begin and then just rechecking my measurements of the fabric to make sure that I bought the right size. And guess what? I didn't have the right size fabric. Oh, so put that one on hold. Went ahead and ordered some more fabric, and I'm still waiting for the fabric to come. And then I thought, you know what? I wanted to start another project. Actually, I should go and get that. So I'm going to pause for a moment. I'll be right back. So I was really excited to start a new sample. I bought it secondhand. So anyway, this was a sampler that I sort of been lusting after, and then decided to go ahead and purchase it. And after I finished the book cover, and I was trying to decide what to do, I thought, well, maybe I'll start this new sampler, which is a really beautiful sampler. It's called the Pastoral Panel. So it's not your typical sampler in that there's no alphabet, there's no border, and I'll put a picture here of the sampler. But it's by Essamplaire, again, like the book cover, and it's a lot of specialty stitches. So I thought, oh, let me get started on that one. It will be so much fun. It's so exciting. So I went ahead and set it up. And what you have to do is transfer the pattern onto the linen. So and then I laced it onto this frame. So this is what it's going to look like. You can kind of tell there are several animals and a woman and a man. I think it's a farmer, actually. Let's see if I can point him out. I think he's a shepherd, actually, here. You can see the crook in his hand. And then there's a woman here. So that would be the farmer's wife, I believe. So I got that set up and then sort of chickened out. There are lots of stitches that I'm not familiar with, and I'm kind of holding off working on that until maybe I get some doodle cloth and I can do some practice stitches. So, oh goodness. I mean, I also wanted to do the whitework sampler, which I've sort of chickened out doing as well, because that also is kind of intensive. And I think, I don't doubt that I can't do it and pick it up. I think I can. That's not the issue, but part of the issue is also time. And time and sort of concentration, because I think with those particular projects, you really need to have like a good chunk of time and the ability to sit and concentrate for a long time. And sometimes I just don't have that time, right? And sometimes just doing cross stitch is about all my brain can manage for a period of time. So anyway, I'm sure at some point I will sort of venture into that project, but I'm sort of holding off right now. So I'm waiting for fabric to start the red deer, and I'm waiting to get the courage to begin the pastoral panel. And so in the meantime, I thought, oh, I have a sampler that I started quite a long time ago and I haven't finished. So let me pick that one up again. So I went back and picked up Rebecca Cullin, which is a Scarlet letter sampler. And this particular sampler is quite large. I am stitching it on 35 count linen. I do wish that I'd gone to the 40 count, but too late. Way overcommitted at this point. But it's still a really fun sampler. And the interesting thing about it is it has both the combination of cross stitch and some freehand embroidery. So I'll show you what that looks like. And I may not be able to get it all in the frame. So this is, let's see, the top of the sampler. I'm not quite done with the border. I just have a few strawberries left to finish. And then I have a little bit of the top to finish with this satin stitch. I don't remember now this area right here. The satin stitch. I can't remember what that's called. Oh my God, I'm losing my head, my brain. There's some Algerian eye stitching here in these little boxes. This was a fun area to stitch, just all those pretty colors. I really enjoyed that. And then as you go down the sampler, there's more freehand stitching. So at the very bottom is that big hill with stags and some trees, and then there are those two very large trees on each side of the sampler that are freehand with stem stitching. And then in the middle of the sampler is a very big bird sitting on a tree branch. So I've just begun the outlining the bird. This week I spent a lot of time on the flowers here, this flower spray. So the carnation here in the center, and then this flower here, which will have a mirror image of it on this side as well. And that's all freehand. A lot of satin stitching, some stem stitching, and some straight stitches. So that's been really fun. I haven't traced any of the pattern onto the linen. I've just been using the chart and sort of counting up how many threads and how many up threads it goes and how many over it goes when I'm stem stitching. So I like to think of it as sort of I'm drawing with the thread and kind of getting into the mode that way, rather than counting so much. I mean, I am sort of counting just to have a ballpark, like how far I need to go. But if I put in my head that this is like drawing with my thread, it seems to flow a little bit better. So I don't know. Anyway, I have a lot left to do. Actually, I'll go get the pattern. I should have brought it over here, but let me go get the pattern and I'll show you what the finished product looks like. So this is what Rebecca Cullin will look like. You can see there's a bird, that big bird in the center, and flower sprays on either side of the bird, and then there's another section of free stitching above those flower sprays. So it's a really beautiful sampler. And there's another sampler that was done similar to this called, I think it's Jane Ballard. Let me see, where is it? Yeah, Jane Ballard, and it's in the Fitzwilliam Museum. So really fantastic sampler. Lots of fun motifs in there as well. So clearly I have a ways to go, but I am making pretty good progress. Just looking to see if it says how old she was when she made this. I don't know, it doesn't say. Anyway, if anyone's interested in this sampler and you don't like to do freehand embroidery, the instructions come with cross-stitching the bird and the trees and the floral sprays. So you don't have to do it freehand if you don't want to. So that's kind of cool. I've seen it done both ways. I've seen a finished sampler done in cross-stitch, and it was really pretty too. It's just a beautiful sampler. So that's kind of what I've been up to stitching-wise. I've really not added to my stash. It was really exciting to see the new releases out of Nashville, and I'm trying really hard not to buy any more sampler charts because I have so many projects already. So I don't know, but it's hard to resist. So actually, I actually did buy one today. Now I'm remembering. Oh my God. I bought, let's see, what did I buy? GigiR and Needlework Press did a sampler chart together on a, oh God, a sampler from Amsterdam? Yeah, it's from Europe. It's a really pretty sampler. Again, I think I'll put, no, over here. Oh my God, why can't I do this? I'll put a picture of it here. Anyway, what? Oh, I know. The last thing I wanted to show you guys is a book that I read recently, Threads of Feeling, and this is from an exhibit that was at the London Foundling Hospital. And what a touching and lovely book this was. It's called, there was an exhibit at the Foundling Hospital, I think in 2015. What they pulled together were textile tokens, they called it. So when children were brought to the Foundling Hospital from the very beginning, the mothers who left them at the hospital for a variety of reasons, but mostly probably because they couldn't actually take care of the kids. They left with the child, the infant at that time, some sort of token that could identify them as theirs, should their circumstances change, and they would be able to come back and pick their children up. And the tokens varied from ribbons to pieces of clothing to sometimes actually a stitched item. And it was just really sort of lovely to, really profound. I can't imagine the hardships that these poor mothers must have been going through to resort to having to leave their child somewhere, but there was a place for them to go. Many of the children did not survive because, of course, infant mortality in those days was really high. But they kept these textile tokens. And so they were able to display these really touching tokens that, mothers had left with their children. So it was really a lovely little book to read. And it gave a really interesting, especially for scholars of textiles, it gave them a really interesting insight into the types of clothing or textiles that were left with these children. And, just from sort of a socio-economic kind of perspective, they were able to determine, what things, what kinds of textiles were available, and from that, have an idea of, the circumstances from which that person may have come from. So, depending on the type of fabric, they could sort of determine if that family was a little bit more well off than other families, just based on the kind of fabric or textiles that were left with the children. So kind of a fascinating look into, that period of time from 1740 to 1770. So I'll show you a few pictures. So here's a picture of something that was embroidered and left with a child. Here's a little sampler that was left. Here's some fabrics, some really pretty kind of calico fabrics, I guess. And then some other, let's see. Oh, this one was that was on the cover. A red heart. It's so sweet. Ribbons. These are the ribbons they left. So anyway, it's not a book specifically about stitching, but it is a book about textiles, and there was some embroidery in here, but just a really sweet book. I recommend it. It was a fast read. I really enjoyed it. Even my husband was interested in it and found it just fascinating, sort of a fascinating topic. So anyway, I think that's all I have for today. I hope you're enjoying your own stitching, and please leave a comment and ask questions, or subscribe if you're not a subscriber. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.